Hello and welcome back to Surviving to Thriving for Highly Sensitives. And I'm your host, Tammy Goen, and high sensitivity coach. And I'm also here today with Teresa Owen. I will be introducing her shortly. And for now, I just wanted to remind everybody, we're talking this week about self-care and why that's so important for us highly sensitives who are like, we have these like big sponges and we pull all this stuff in and we don't have the same filters. So we really, really need to calm our nervous system and also to just really pay attention to self-care. And there's so many ways to do that. And I talked about a few of them last week. So things like meditation and mindful practices, exercise, especially if it's to that point where it's helping you but doesn't exhaust you, time in nature, because we really connect there really well, reading, watching, listening to uplifting, books and movies and podcasts, things like that. Dancing, qigong, tai chi, martial arts, movement stuff that lets our energy move around, and various other like creative outlets. And I did talk about and mention that I would be bringing someone on this week about yoga. And so I'm really excited to be able to talk about that and how that can help us as highly sensitive. So I would love now to introduce Teresa Owen. And, I was noticing or realizing that we connected like almost a year and a half ago now, I think.
Yeah.
Together, which was really, really fun. So it's really great to have you here with me today. So
Great to be here.
Yeah, Teresa, she is the owner of Inner Smile Yoga. I love that name. When we first connected and I saw that, I'm like, oh, I like her already because of her name. She's a certified yoga therapist, as opposed to, and this I'll have you talk about too, just, yoga instructor, and has been teaching since 2001. She's passionate about sharing her love of lifelong learning and personal growth, and works with a variety of modalities to address each individual's needs. She's skilled in tracking the movement and grounding of energy, really, really key for us, right? And is a dedicated student and teacher of shadow yoga, which I'll have you explain, and a Reiki master, and is currently studying Kabbalistic healing. So you are just a wealth of information and have so many different focus areas. That's awesome. And you have a Yoga Alliance certification and provider certification, and I'm going to probably mess this up, International Association of Yoga Therapy certification.
Yeah.
So it's awesome to have you here. Amazing stuff. So to start, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more that I didn't just cover there, but just to kind of give everyone an idea of who you are and how you came to be so interested in yoga, and
Sure.
And to the point of actually teaching it.
Sure. Yeah. How much time you got? No. I before I came to yoga, I've always been sort of interested in more, I guess, really more mystical traditions. I've always sort of been fascinated with mythology, with folklore, with mystical traditions, and kind of got involved with studying different kind of comparative religions at a pretty young age. And I think that I really credit my father for that. He had a natural curiosity with all of that and shared it with me and had all these books. And I was just sort of hungry for that kind of information. And so I think when I think about that, I ended up teaching yoga. It's sort of all kind of, we all have our generally straight lines. They're a little bit like this, which is actually cool. So anyway, at some point I got really involved with masters swimming, which was, I'm pretty athletic, and felt like I was a little bit out of balance. I injured myself a little bit. So I took up a few yoga classes and I really loved them. It was almost like, it was such a great balance. And so now I'm at the point where I swim a little and I do yoga every day. So it's kind of flipped the switch or whatever. But I initially started because I wanted to create a little bit more balance, more on the physical level, not really knowing so much about the esoteric side of yoga and the philosophical and physiological benefits. So learned those gradually over time. And I was in the middle of raising kids. a lot of different dramatic things happening that, and I found yoga really, really helpful. It was kind of a steadiness that it brought to my parenting style that I didn't really have a grasp on whether I was really capable of or not. But yeah, so that's how I kind of got into it, was more on the physical side, as many people do. And then it was like, oh, this is much bigger than I thought it was. And this is much more of a lifestyle, much more of a holistic self-care, self-study, self-awareness practice, which has all kinds of benefits, as you know. So
yes, and I was going to mention actually a little bit later, but perfect segue there, that's the way I approached yoga. I had always been interested in it just because I'd heard about it and thought it would be a really great physical practice, but I had limitations with a shoulder injury. And so when I got it fixed, I thought, oh, I want to do yoga, learn and started. And I thought it was amazing, but my mindset on it was, and I use this term loosely, but glorified stretching.
Yeah.
Right? I just thought, oh, this is just like stretching. I could do any version, but I really want to try this, not having any idea that there was so much more beyond that physical piece. So I'm glad you talked about that, because you probably run into that a lot with people saying, oh, it's just stretching, or whatever their expectations might be. So, and what is shadow yoga?
That's a good question. So shadow yoga is a discipline that I've been studying or kind of gravitated to over the last 12, 13 years. And it's become kind of my yoga home for personal practice, as well as I am about 3 years ago started teaching. It's a practice that focuses more deeply on the holistic of what Hatha yoga has to offer. And so there's a philosophy behind it that you have to build the container first. It's more of a step-by-step process rather than jumping in and doing a bunch of physical movement. It is physically demanding, but it demands your alertness, your attention to what I would call, one of my teachers refers to them as black holes, like places where the mind and body aren't connecting, places that your movement has developed over time with skipping steps on a neurological level. Things like that show up in what we call the preparatory work. The practice itself is more like a school where you go through stages of development, and then when the teacher thinks you're ready for the next thing, they'll tell you, okay, you're ready to try this, that, or the other. And the movement itself is really tied into the cycles of the day and the cycles of the moon. So there's a lot more circular movement in the practice, which is always great for proprioception, but also great for whole body circulation and the nervous system, really good for the nervous system. So that was a long-winded answer, but I think it's a practice that focuses more on the energetic principles behind how yoga and the science behind it and how it was developed. And many other practices have that within that container, but their focus is a little bit different relative to step by step. That's probably enough for now.
Yeah. Sounds fascinating and wonderful. So whether that style or what you've been doing or just yoga in general, could you talk a little bit about how you think that is specifically, good for high sensitivity and how that helps us?
Sure.
And, it helps everyone, obviously, but even that much more so for highly sensitives.
Yeah, and I think it really requires a good teacher. And I know I'm not just talking about myself. So much of yoga here in the West has been kind of dumbed down to the physical side of the practice and what I would call more of the, I don't know, we're seeing a lot of this during the pandemic too, as things are changing and people are becoming more aware. There's a kind of what I would call a pop culture feel good, we're going to read this poem, we're going to say these things, so there's not a lot of talk about the deeper philosophy. There's not a lot of talk about self-study, which is a principle in yoga that I try to weave into all my classes, which is, the whole principle is to get to know you inside, really to know your edges, to know what you need to know and to start trusting and having faith in that intuition. So I like to say the pathway in is through the physical, but it requires an attentiveness, an awareness, kind of a pointing to where things are moving or to be felt, and then accepting what is there and working with that. So for highly sensitive people, I think, and I am one, so I can speak from that, and as well as my son, who's even more sensitive than I am, it's very hard to know where the boundary is between you and other, because you're always feeling so much of everything that's not really yours. And so what this practice can do is can help you to learn how to discriminate between the two and use some of the physical and breath principles to really kind of drive that home.
Nice. And, you know, as highly sensitives, we do have this tendency, not all of us, but many of us, toward perfectionism. And
absolutely
looking a certain way, or how people think about us, and doing everything like 110, 150% because we can. So we think we should, and, you know, we go through that whole thing. So could you talk a little bit about like expectations in a yoga practice?
That's an excellent question.
For HSP?
That's an excellent question. I love that question. So the first thing I'm going to say about that is in yoga philosophy and in many other early traditional philosophy pieces like Buddhism, Sufism, Vedanta, some of the older philosophies, the source of all pain is said to be expectation, period. And so it's a really interesting question to take into yourself, is again, discriminating between what is expectation and where am I right in this moment, and how can I live within this moment and just be purely present rather than having this expectation. So for example, when you show up on the mat, many people, myself included for a while, you know, you want to have, you so much enjoy the experience that you want to have the same experience you had yesterday. Like, that was such a great practice, and I'm just going to go out. And you know what? It's just not always there. It's not always available. So I think the coaching is really to do an assessment at the beginning of practice, where you assess where you are in that moment, emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, quality of your thinking, the texture of the breath. Accept what is, and just in the process of accepting what is, brings you to a place where you're more skillful with your movement in terms of how you move forward. I don't know if that makes sense. But a lot of times we don't take the time to assess what is true. We want to touch our toes. We want to put our foot behind our head. We want to balance for 20 minutes. I want to stand on my head. You know, that's not yoga. Yoga is what is true in this moment, and how can I skillfully address what I need in this moment? And can I be in a learning space to cultivate enough of a toolkit? It doesn't have to be 1,000 or 3,000 different poses. It could be 2 or 3 things that you do that just bring the nervous system down, that ground you, that make the mind more expansive, so that you have room to play and feel and be. So.
And, you know, just listening to you talk about it, and your voice and your energy is like, I'm like so calm right now. Yes, such a good practice. And for all of those things that you've been talking about. And, you know, in terms of that expectation thing, it's like meditation, right? It's like, correct. You have people say, oh, hey, you know, have you considered yoga? Have you considered, you know, meditation? Oh, I'm not good at that. Or, oh, no, I can't do that. I'm not flexible.
Exactly.
Or, no, I can't do that because I can't make my mind stop. And seeing it as a practice. Correct. Not like, it reminds me of like when my niece was 6, she would dance all around the house all the time, you know, and then we'd be like, you know, we got to get you into a dance class. And she would just freeze, and her face would fall, and she'd be like, oh no, I can't do that. I don't know how to dance. Yeah. And she was, you know, had those limitations that at 6, you know, it's like, oh, I have to way if I'm going to go in a group with people. And, you know, so when we can have, she's way beyond that now, and she's getting ready to graduate high school, but she's such an achiever, and, you know, she doesn't have those limitations anymore, thankfully. But that's pretty common that, you know, when clients come to me and I suggest certain things, or say, oh, what, you know, have experience with this or with this, and they'll be like, oh, I can't, there's this assumption, I can't do that because this, you know,
Right.
rather than seeing that as like, oh, okay, what are my limitations at this moment? And
Right.
can I be open to that being able to shift, even though I don't know what that's going to look like, you know?
Right. No, there's a lot of trust involved to be able to shift your mind away from achievement to exploration and trust. And I think that's the big shift in the beginning. And there's this thing that happens, as you're mentioning, where people compare themselves to the person next to them on the mat, or in my case, I do some hybrid classes, so people are both in studio and on screen. And can you completely stay on your mat in your experience and not expect or force? There's all kinds of microaggressions that show up in a yoga practice that can really teach us about our mindset. And if we're paying attention, it's like, oh God, I'm being really kind of hard on myself. Like this force, to what end? You know, and almost always there's a rubber band effect with an aggression or a microaggression where we're trying to force ourselves into something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like what you said, though, this idea that you have this beautiful vision of this young woman dancing, dancing, dancing. And then the idea of staring that just, you know, halts her in her tracks, it freezes her in her tracks. And it's just, you know, it's just, it's a natural part of evolution, of learning who we are in the world, where we are in the world, and then learning to accept who we are and nurture that, as opposed to looking for all the validation from the outside.
Right.
So,
and
yeah.
to quiet those expectations or that need to be perfect or do things just right, and that tendency to be hard on ourselves, to be able to let go of all of that and just experience like, oh, this is what my body's doing right now. This is what energy feels like right now, without having that judgment of, is that okay or not? It just in that moment. And that's so freeing.
Very much so.
You know, across the board in life, of course, but especially in a practice like that, where you're like, okay, this is, you know, if you have that mindset, this is supposed to be good for me, and I have to do it this way, and I have to do it just right. And then if that doesn't happen, then you're frustrated, and then that's not going to provide, you know,
it's a vicious cycle, right? It just feeds on itself.
So
Absolutely.
It's really an experience of practice in mindset.
It is.
Being able to say, I'm going to allow myself to learn this thing called yoga, and of course we tend to go deep and want to see all sides. So we're going to probably want to like, research a little bit and find out where it came from.
Sure.
And that kind of stuff, but being open to, yeah, this is a process, it's a practice, and it's just a learning experience, a growing experience, without having those like preconceived ideas.
Or recognizing too, Tammy, that those ideas are preconceived. It's not like they're going to go away, but you can put them in their place, if you will. So rather than having them be front and center, or the thing that's preventing you, is seeing it for what it is, which is it is a preconceived thought pattern. It's not something I necessarily want to feed. What would happen if I set that down and had a different thought pattern, just like what you said, shifting away from I can't to what would happen if I just took 5 minutes just to listen? Can I be curious?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just as much as transforming that thought or that sentence into something different. Then your brain is like a little, it follows whatever you plant. So if you plant that, so if you know that that's there, it's kind of what you were saying earlier, is that in meditation, I can't do it because my mind is always active. No, that's why you should do it. Your mind doesn't stop in meditation. Your mind is going to continue to go, but it's like a muscle, right? You're developing that discipline, that muscle, to where you can sit with all that busyness and not feed it.
And with yoga and meditation, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Just like you had mentioned, it's like you have days when you are just on, if you will, like, oh, this flows so much more easily and not even having to, work so hard or whatever. It's just like, oh, okay, that's good. Like, okay, good, I'm making progress. And then the next day you're like all over the place. And like, okay, wait, I can't even do this without getting up and, jumping around and moving my body. And, let's try again. So this, that same thing is it's flow. and
Ebb
it's
and
not
flow.
always the same. And so we
Yeah.
can't go on even the previous day, or it's like, well, I've gotten to this point, I should be able to.
Correct.
And just being, yeah, just in that moment.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
And I share this story. I think it's really fascinating because I'm going to ask you a question about it. But when I was doing massage for a while, I had a client who would come in, like emergency, my neck is just driving, so sore. And then, so after a while of working on her, I said, so have you considered yoga? I thought that would be an amazing practice for her to, maintain between not just coming to see me, but to start to, for so many reasons, right? And this was, if I didn't tell you this in the past, you'll probably laugh now, or laugh anyway if I did tell you, but she immediately, sort of like when I was talking about my niece like freezing, she just like her body just got super tense.
Wow.
Which of course, I'm trying to help alleviate that. And she goes, oh, I know all about yoga.
Oh.
Okay, what's coming?
Oh.
Yeah, I was in San Francisco in the 60s, and I know all about that thing it's all based on satanic principles. I'm trying to be professional, whatever. I'm like, what?
Wow.
It's actually quite spiritual. And she wasn't hearing anything except her story. But anyway, I just thought that was so amusing because I'm like, really?
Wow.
It's the opposite of that. So I was just curious, if you run into any like myths or things that get in people's way of like, oh, I can't do yoga. That's a whatever.
Yeah, no, I don't run into it as much anymore as I did about 10 years ago. So I am originally from California, the Bay Area near San Francisco, and the hippies and the satanic yoga. But but I wasn't, when I moved here, I had quite the culture shock around people having those beliefs about yoga, that I had people coming into trainings that would ask me, is this going to change my relationship with Jesus? That kind of thing. And I said, this isn't anti-religion. This is a philosophy. This is a life philosophy that actually, if you look at the roots of Catholicism, you look at mystical Catholicism, you look at the basis of which most of these religions were founded on, there's clearly a shared vision across all of those traditions. This isn't telling you what to believe. This is simply a way to get to know who you are, where your edges are, and how to take care of yourself, and ultimately how to create or be who you are meant to be in this life. And so yes, the answer is yes. I actually have one small story I'll tell, which is when I'd only been here for a year. I was teaching at a gym, and one of the students asked me if I was available to teach for a group of women. I said, sure, I'd be happy to come and do a private with a group of women. And she says, yeah, but I don't want any of that. What did she call it? Oh, now I'm going to screw it up. Anyway, she said something, I don't want any of that mind bending stuff or whatever. So in other words, she didn't want any meditation. She was feeling that was mind control. And I had quite an awakening coming to, Atlanta, and I'd never been around that kind of bias so strongly before. It's different now. It's definitely softened. There's definitely, I think we see this across the US, across the world. There is a seeking that's different than it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I have 20 stories like that, but that's the one I remember. I don't want any of that mind control stuff. I thought, wow, okay. And kind of like what you were talking about, that other client, just really the brakes got put on. So yes.
So cool. Like you said, we could just talk for hours, and we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm trying to figure where I want to go, but I think, like if you could just provide a sentence or two explaining how and why a yoga practice specifically is so beneficial for HSPs, and then also just throw in anything if there are like contraindications or speak to like limitations if people are like, oh, I want to do yoga, but this thing, but
I have this injury or that injury. Yeah, no, I think, first of all, I'll kind of back into it a little bit. First of all, I'll say that if anybody is working with an injury or a physical limitation, that's something you want to share with the teacher prior to class. And a good teacher will take that into consideration and give you lots of options in the course of a class. And I would say for anyone, particularly with HSPs, the last thing they need is what I would call a vinyasa class, which is the faster paced, one breath at a time. Unless you've had prior experience and you're comfortable in that area, it wouldn't be where I would direct someone who's highly sensitive to begin with, because because of what we talked about earlier with the perfectionism and the striving, just kind of being ever present for a lot of us, that tends to pull you into that competitive achievement, push, 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 which is where you can really kind of hurt yourself. Maybe not on the physical level, but it can wear out your nervous system, as you mentioned at the top of the hour. So that's one thing. And I think, so that's one thing I would counsel people to do: your homework, research it, talk to a couple teachers, see what their style is, take the class, knowing that you're in charge of your body. If something doesn't feel right, you don't frickin' do it. Sorry, you don't do it. And it's okay to sit and wait that out. It's okay to rest and wait that out and join when the body feels ready. So it's really a conditioning of the mind to start to know the body better, to know, where we are emotionally too. So, but specifically, a good yoga practice will teach you how to ground, which is like what's the missing ingredient. And that's the other thing with vinyasa. Sometimes there's not a lot of grounding. It's just more calisthenics. Not always. People that have been doing it a while have that experience. They know how to do it. But in the beginning, you want to do a class that has at least a certain amount of leg work in it to help you ground in a guided way, so that you can feel the energetic process, and that's being cued through the class. So I think that's so important.
Yeah, thank you. And I would want you to talk about that for another like 15 minutes.
I could.
But it's just such really great information. And again, following up on that idea of like being kind to ourselves and letting go of expectations and being in that moment and listening to ourselves, right? I mean, because I work with people on that all the time. It's like, you go in, get quiet, go in and say, does this resonate? How does this feel? It doesn't matter what, somebody recommended this person. Well, that doesn't mean anything if it doesn't resonate for you.
Correct.
Being open to like, let me see if this works for me.
Right.
And if not,
then learning how to
adjust it and find one that does work for me. So that's
and learning how to trust that inner guidance. Right.
Before we have to
and over
wrap
again.
up, I know you have a program coming in March. Can you just talk?
I do, sure. Yeah, no. As we mentioned earlier, thank you for asking. So it's called Flip the Switch. It's a 12-day yoga, meditation, and mindset challenge where I've set it up to do 55 minutes. So it's 30 minutes of yoga, 10 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of journaling, and 5 minutes of Q&A. And we're doing it the same time every day for 12 days. And leading into spring equinox. So there's a natural transition that happens this time of year. It's a good time to kind of open yourself up to that. The main reason I developed the program is because I've been feeling this shift that everybody is, especially those of us that feel deeply, you can feel the depression, the anxiety, the fear, and it's hard to know what's yours and what's not yours. And this call to go inward is getting stronger. And I wanted to give people a container with which to experience that.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, so ask me, people can check that out if they're interested.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sorry that we have to wrap up. It's been
no
amazing
problem.
Talking with you, but in the description for the episode today, there is a link for Teresa's website and direct link for this program that she was just mentioning. So do check those things out. Hopefully, listening to Teresa talk today helped inspire you to think of this as a potential new practice for your self-care if you're not already doing that. And of course, feel free to reach out to either of us if you have questions. And I will, of course, divert any yoga questions to you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wealth of information and your energy. And it's been very lovely.
Well, thank you, Tammy, for having me. It's a delight. I love sharing.
Thank you so much. And
All right.
we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us, everyone.